It's a new week and we have serious business to do, and the best place to start is normally here on Business Morning on Channels Television. I'm Ini John Mekwa. You're welcome to the program. We'll begin with global oil prices. It fell more than $1 on Monday, backing off last week's gains as questions over China's economy outweighed OPEC Plus output cuts and a 7th straight drop in the number of oil and gas rigs operating in the United States. The Brent crude lost $1.15 to trade at $75.46 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was down $1.09 to $70.69 a barrel. Last week, Brent posted a gain of 2.4%, while WTI rose 2.3%. A number of major banks have cut their 2023 gross domestic product growth forecast for China after May data last week showed that post-COVID recovery in the world's second largest economy was faltering. China is set to roll out more stimulus support for its slowing economy this year, but concerns over debts and capital flight will keep the measures targeted at shoring up weak demand in the consumer and private sectors. Still, China's refinery throughput rose in May to its second highest total on record, helping to boost last week's gains. And U.S. energy firms cut the number of working oil and natural gas rigs for a 7th week in a row for the first time since July 2020. Still talking oil now, but edible oil. Malaysian palm oil futures eased on Monday after surging 6% in the previous session, although concerns over dry weather taking a toll on global production of palm and soybeans kept the contract near 6-week highs. The benchmark palm oil contracts for September delivery on the Bursa Malaysia Derivatives Exchange slid 9 ringgit, that's about 0.24% to 3,734 ringgit, equivalent to $808.75 per metric ton during early trade. Global oil prices fell on Monday, backing off last week's gains as questions over China's economy outweighed OPEC Plus cuts outputs and the 7th straight drop in the number of oil and gas rigs operating in the United States. Let's come back here to Nigeria and see what's happening, beginning with the central bank. This came over the weekend, specifically yesterday. The Central Bank of Nigeria has shared directives to the operations of cash deposit banks following the changes in the country's FX policies. Now, according to a statement from the Director of Corporate Communications, Dr. Issa Abdulmumuni, the CBN, in line with deliberations at the meeting, provided further guidance to deposit money banks as follows. All visible and invisible transactions, including medical, school fees, BTA, PTA, airline, and other eligible for the investors and exporters window. That's the I&E window. Also, deposit money banks shall ensure expeditious processing of all eligible invisible transactions on behalf of their customers using the applicable rate at the I&E window. Ordinary domiciliary account holders shall have unfettered and unrestricted access to funds in their account. Domiciliary account holders are permitted to utilize cash deposits not exceeding $10,000 per day or its equivalent. Then cash deposits into domiciliary accounts will not be restricted, subject to DMBs, and the bank will normalize its CRR maintenance processes and ensure equity in its implementation across the banking industry. And that's according to the statement that was signed by Mr. Issa. And it says that these policy changes aim to promote transparency, liquidity, and price recovery in the FX markets. Moving on now, we go to Ghana, where our correspondent, Chris Illems, is at this time. Earlier, he sent in this report telling us that African countries must be deliberate in liberalizing integration and allow for easier entry and exit if the continent is serious about boosting intra-trade and investment opportunities. The president of Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, said this at the annual Afreximbank meeting held in Accra, Ghana. Former President Olusegun Obasanjo is among the guests at that occasion, and Chris Illems gives us this report.
Africa continues to deal with several challenges necessitated by poor leadership, the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine crisis, rising death profile, and the impact of insecurity on the continent. It has therefore become imperative for African countries to find an access out of this conundrum that threatens to keep the continent prostrate despite its huge resources and investment potential. For these reasons, institutions such as Afreximbank was launched in 1993 in Abuja, Nigeria. "30 years after, the continent's top business minds, government functionaries and policymakers, past and present leaders, arrive in Accra, Ghana to grace the occasion."
First, I would like to thank the government of Ghana for its great hospitality.
The tasks before the speakers are marked out. How does the continent harness its trade and investment portfolio in order to grow its economy?
If you look at the treaty documents that establish the Organization of African Unity, they clearly set out an objective, and that objective is that we must have economic integration in Africa, and that we must introduce tools to advance that objective of economic integration in Africa.
Turbocharging the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is a veritable tool to deliver on some of the aspirations of the continent. There are, however, some hurdles to scale.
Luckily, I'm no longer an official minister, so I think I can speak a bit freely without getting into trouble. I think the major problem that we have had is the individual interest that we have been projecting for our country.
I cannot imagine that right now we are importing $50 billion per year food from outside the continent, while we have 60% arable land in Africa.
This is an unexpected treat for me because I wasn't...
As far as the president of the Dangote Group is concerned, Africa countries must allow for free movement in order to promote trade and investment opportunities.
See, if I now have to get a visa to get into country A as an African, and now we go with a British guy who, or maybe a Nigerian, it has happened to me, a Nigerian holding British passport, he was allowed in, and you know, we're arguing, debating about my visa, and I'm the one, you know, and I'm the one with the money.
Can you imagine?
Yes.
Can you imagine?
So I think what maybe African countries they need to do is that why don't you give Africans visa on arrival? That will facilitate trade.
Yes.
If you are making life difficult for me, there's no way I'll go and invest.
Yes.
In the next couple of days, great minds will on this land attempt to churn out ideas that they believe the continent requires to salvage its dwindling fortune. From Accra, Ghana, Chris Lems, Channels Television News.
We'll certainly be having more on that. Chris Lems will be joining BZinc Live to give us update from that meeting. But I mean, the bottom line is quite there. Mr. Dangote said it. We do need, as Africans, to give ourselves access. We have the AfTA. How is that working? Because of a lot of restrictions by individual countries. It's time for us to bring down the barriers and trade between ourselves. Well, let's move on to today's first conversation. And it is not far away from what we talked about recently in Nigeria. The issue of FX and FX unification, FX rate unification has been top conversation. So let's talk to someone who is directly impacted by this. His business is to help you get FX. It's supposed to be. Well, we have our president of the Bureau of the Exchange Operators, Mr. Aminu Gwadabe, joins us virtually from Mina in Niger State to tell us how all of these changes have been affecting his operations. Mr. Gwadabe, thank you so much for your time. Good morning. How is all these changes, the pronouncements of the president, CBN has spoken, now we have changes to domiciliary account. How is it affecting your operation as a BDC?
First, Thank you very much. And we want to thank the President and the Central Bank of Nigeria for aligning with our advocacy. We have been calling for collapsing of various exchange rates in the market to ensure liquidity, transparency, and clearance market rate. So it has now come. It's a bit late. And also, it's going to be painful in the short run. However, in the long run, it's better to take a decision. It's better to take an action to make corrections of so many issues that are putting the foreign exchange market into topsy-turvy. Yes, like you said, there are a lot of changes. First, we start with a floating currency. A floating currency is a currency that its value is being determined in the, by the market forces, that is demand and supply. So when the currency is being floated, it's called a fluctuating currency. Then the other changes, like you have rightly mentioned by the central bank in terms of willing buyer, willing seller, it only means that there must be a willing buyer, willing seller, and they are the ones to determine the rate themselves. It's not the central bank now that is pegging the exchange rate. So that's about willing buyer and willing seller. And it has happened even during Obasanjo, during Babangida, so it's not new. It's just how it's going to be implemented. Then also all invisible transactions have to go through the I&E window. Invisible transactions, they are nothing more than the PTA, BTA, medical, school fees, subscription, and what have you. Then also the collapse of the all segments of the market into one, like a kind of unified foreign exchange market, which was also introduced in 2016, 2017. We have what we call a foreign exchange, a single foreign exchange market. However, as an operator, how does it affect you? One is the inclusion. If you look at it, PTA, medical fees, and personal traveling allowance, these are urgent transactions of the public. And they said it should still be met by the banks. We are not competitors to the bank. We are only complementary because of our convenience. You cannot come to the airport at 2 a.m. and you see a bank that's open for you to change your dollar. So that makes us complementary, not competitors. So these are urgent transactions that should be allowed by the Bureau de Change operators to carry on. Then also the removal of restrictions in the domiciliary account. This is also key for the SME to be sure, to get access of foreign exchange to be able to meet up their demand. You see, the floating of the currency, local currency, has its own positive and negative impact. One, it will increase the efficiency. One, it will build foreign reserve. It will also create confidence in the market. And it will remove illegal economic behaviors that are ab initio creating pressure on the naira, like grafted funds purchasing the dollars, because it's not the purchase of dollar that create volatility, but the pursuance of grafted or an income on the FX market is what is causing the volatility. So now there's no more room for rent seeking, there's no more room for round tripping, there's no more room for speculation, there's no more room for hoarding. So all this put together, we have to galvanize and strengthen liquidity in the market. However, it is important, like I said, to include the Bureau de Change. And another aspect that I've seen is missing in the changes. I know the CBN are thinking all the time to introduce policies that will galvanize liquidity, because it's an issue of liquidity. When the fuel subsidy was removed, we did not see it going government have intended, because it is everywhere. It is everywhere. So that is the approach that the central bank and the federal government should take in ensuring that there's liquidity in the market. And the role of Bureau de Change is to bridge the liquidity in the market. For instance, we take care of urgent demand like travelers, school fees, and also SME that have little demand for their spare part in computer, those that are in small business, those are in tailoring, they need their spare part and what have you. So This is our most critical role. We serve the critical retail end of the market, where most of the time the volatility is pervasive. So also, like I said,
Mr.
the removal of
Gwadabe,
restriction on domiciliary account is going to add to the liquidity in the market and ensure there is stability. It's not the value of the currency.
All right, Mr. Gwadabe.
Of the currency is what
Mr. Gwadabe, let me just ask you this. We do know that the former CBN governor, or the embattled, beg your pardon, CBN governor had announced they had stopped the sale of foreign exchange to BDCs. I think that was last year or so.
2 years. 2 years.
2 years ago. Thank you so much for that. Right. So where was your source now? Any hope of that source that's the banks selling to you directly?
Honestly, the current position of the Bureau de Change is even hopeless in terms of sourcing. All our hope was like, who can be included now that there is no any issues surrounding the management of the exchange rate. Even before, most of our members heavily rely on the CBN window. Other sources that would have been available for the Bureau de Change are restricted. I, as a Bureau de Change licensed CBN's licensed operator, I cannot be even a pickup agent of the diaspora remittances. This is a hanging fruit that we have always been calling on the CBN and the federal government to look into. Other countries like India, like China, they are leveraging. In fact, India received nothing less than $30 billion annually for infrastructure with the collaboration of their own Bureau de Change. So this is a hanging fruit. This is a source that if the Apex Bank and the federal government
seems
to remain injecting liquidity. So that is one source. Because right now we have no sources. Nigeria is not a tourist country. And our number, we are talking about 5,000 members. So you see, it's difficult. Most of us have closed our shops. Most of us have sacked. We employ nothing less than 20 to 30,000. We have a capitalization of over 350 billion in the economy. We do a lot to ensure that we serve our role. So we are advising on the Central Bank of Nigeria, the new government that is there, and even the presidency to look into. We have been very, very vital in the economy.
All right, Mr. Gwadabe.
You can achieve price stability,
Mr. Gwadabe.
Liquidity in the market without the Bureau de Change.
All right, Mr. Gwadabe, you mentioned the issue of capital requirement, and we know last week the Policy Advisory Council advised President Tinubu to increase the capital requirement for BDCs. Just very briefly now, because we're out of time, are you in support of this, and at what level do you think will make people have enough, but people and the government have enough confidence in BDCs?
Capitalization is a 1 minute question. If you raise capital, you did not solve the fundamental problems. So what we advise is maybe a kind of consolidation that has been happening in the other financial institutions like the banking, microfinance. So that will go a long way. And profiling. So it's just not to increase the capital and you think that you have solved the problem. Increase of capital is just a 1 minute question. It does not solve the main and fundamental issue surrounding the management of foreign exchange or the supervision of Bureau de Change operators in the country.
All right,
so
Mr. Aminu.
We are okay for reforms.
Thank you, Mr. Aminu.
In forms of consolidation, not to increase in capital. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you so much, President of Bureau de Change Operators in Nigeria. Thank you for your time. And of course, this is an ongoing story. We'll certainly have you and speak to you anytime soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Let's take a break. When we come back, other conversations are lined just for you. Welcome back, still here on Business Morning, discussing current and relevant issues. One of those current issues is the removal of subsidy on petrol and the impact it's having on you, on your pockets, your spending every day. And we've had a lot of talks about palliatives that could buffer some of those harsh realities that we now face after petrol has gone as high, at least in Lagos, 488 naira for a litre. And we've seen, of course, the spillover effects on transport, food prices, everything. So now let's have joining us to discuss some of those possible palliatives that may be able to buffer that impact on you, on your household, and on businesses. Let's discuss this with Mr. Dr. Peter Bankole. He's the director at Enterprise Development Center at Lagos Business School. Thank you so much, Dr. Bankole, for your time this morning. I know you've also been feeling the pinch, but in case you live in another part of the country where you're not feeling it, how has this changes buying petrol at least 488 naira for a litre? How has it changed your lifestyle? How has it changed your spending?
Okay, thank you very much for having me on the program. Indeed, things have changed, and they will still continue. In the first time I filled my tank, it was 3 times what I used to fill it with. And so I had to do a mental calculation very quickly as to how I move, where I go, and it has to be planned. That's just the reality. And so from my house to the university, which I'm now, I have left Enterprise Development Center. I'm now at the main university. And it takes about 3 hours because of the traffic and everything. So I have to spend time on campus rather than going back and forth every day. That is the reality. And that is what some of us have to go through. But it is tough.
All right, so tell us, we know that the government, I think they're meeting today to discuss some of those palliatives. We had a lot of people from the oil and gas sector to discuss possible palliatives that could run deep down to meet a larger population of Nigeria to buffer some of this impact. What, from your perspective, can be so all-encompassing, or maybe not all-encompassing, but at least cover majority of the population?
Okay, so I'm going to divide it into 2. There is the individual side, and there is also the business side. When we go to the level of individuals, the real driver happens to be transportation. In the last few weeks, transportation has more than doubled in most cases. And if you consider somebody going to work and spending something like 2,000 naira a day only on transport, it means to start with, that person has spent 50,000 on transportation alone. We're not even talking about feeding, we're not talking about anything. So that means the minimum wage does not make sense anymore. And so 2 things, or maybe 3, will happen. The first is this palliative that we're talking about must have be driven around transportation. What do I mean by that? So government must make transportation available, accessible, easy for people. If you leave it 100% in the hand of the private sector, then we are all going to pay for it. Now, what that means is that, you know, mass transit buses should be made available. I know that in Lagos, for instance, they are already testing electronic vehicles about 3-4 weeks ago, starting from Oshodi. Now, it's still in its infancy. They should drive that one very seriously, whereby you have, you know, people able to board buses across country, across states, and indeed across country for lesser price. That is where they need to introduce it. But if you are going to rely using the private buses and everything, it is not going to happen. Minimum wage will have to go to at least 100,000 a month.
And that, of course, comes with its own consequences. But I mean, I thought that was for individuals. What about for businesses? Issues of taxes, can it come in?
Now, so for businesses, it's a double-edged sword. Government cannot say we are not going to collect taxes because taxes is a primary way of also getting revenue. But they could have something like a tax break. And for you to have a tax break, you have to be registered. So if I run a company today and I say I want to take part in this palliative process, then I need to register. If I register, let's say over the next 6 months or so, whilst we are struggling and making things to balance, then government can give me some tax concessions over that period. But once that is done, and that 6 months give them the opportunity to deep dive, especially in the area of transportation, generally for the masses, we could look at things like even food. In developed economies, agriculture and co are subsidized. And that means everybody will benefit. So we need to begin to look at that very, very fast. But it's going to take us 3 to 6 months. That's why I said over that period, we can give businesses some kind of relief. But you have to be registered. Now, registering them means that everybody is going to be in the tax net. And that's also okay, because then they can do fairly quickly, bring as many people as possible into the tax net. When majority are paying, then it makes more sense. The reality is that people that are paying taxes today, they are few, and the burden is heavy. And in order to reduce that burden, you need to have many more people into that net. This is a way of bringing them in. At the end of the day, the reality is that we also, as businesses, must change our business model. For instance, instead of working Monday to Friday, physical, we could choose to go to work maybe physical 2 or 3 times in a week. That will save, it's called blended approach. And this is already happening in most developed countries anyway. Then you have to make sure that you put, you ring fence people that are working in this way. It also means that we must have very strong internet access across locations. And more importantly, business will have to rethink whether they want to stay in highbrow areas. So if you are in VI today or Ikoyi, perhaps you want to relocate to Lekki. Perhaps you want to relocate to somewhere that is less expensive, and then your staff can live around those areas. These are things that we need to come to terms with, is the realities of time.
Yeah, realities indeed, Dr. Bamkale. Thank you so much for those suggestions. We do hope that all this will be taken into consideration, both by the government and even by employers and entrepreneurs in the country, because sounds like it could give some buffer, even though some of those will be expensive. Relocating a business, for instance, will also take a lot of planning and capital. But thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this morning, Dr. Peter Bamkale.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, still staying on this, we do know that the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA, has asked President Bola Tinubu to institutionalize wage policy machinery that could automatically adjust wages or hedge them against inflation, as done in other climes. And we're not aware of the fact that one of those requests coming from the meetings that they've had discussing palliative against subsidy removal has been increase in wages. But of course, increase in wages also come with the possibility, most likely, of higher inflation. And we know what inflation does to the country. Just devalues your currency and weakens your purchasing power. So is this the way to go? What other suggestions can NECA give to the government? I mean, what other suggestions can employers give? We did hear Dr. Bamkale there talking about a hybrid working system where people can work less days physically in the office and others, they do it from home. But of course, employers also have to put in a mechanism that will ensure that employees who are at home are working and adding value and not just using it for their personal thing. But let's have the Director General of NECA, Mr. Adewale Smart-Oyerinde, join us virtually from Geneva to talk about some of the ways employers should and could help employees to adapt to this harsh realities, and it will not also be hurting the employers. Also, Dr. Adewale Smart, thank you so much for your time this morning. So if you talk of higher wages, then you also see the risk of inflation. So where do we go from here?
Thank you very much for having us. First, let me say we came back from Geneva over the weekend. The ILO conference ended on Saturday with the governing board meeting, and it's gladdening to say that the Nigerian ambassador to Switzerland actually assumed the leadership of the governing body of the ILO on Saturday. Is going to preside for 1 year, and that is a very big news for us. Coming back to the issue that you raised on how employers can support employees. You know, Sobankole said something that the issue of the subsidy removal and every other thing surrounding it is a double-edged sword for employers, because you have to deal with the issues with employees, how to keep employees motivated, and at the same time, how to keep the production wheel going. You know, the increase in cost of fuel. Look, before now, we were battling with the increase in cost of energy, as it were. You know, diesel bloated up within the last 6, 7, 8 months. So businesses were already struggling with the high cost of energy, and then this came up. So it's a double-edged sword for businesses. But I can assure you that most employers have gone back to the drawing board and looking at how not only to keep the employee motivated within the context of welfare and meeting the basic issues, but also how to keep the wheel of production running. You know, in the extreme, and that is what we don't want. You know, if a business is squeezed, fundamentally squeezed, one of the extreme things that will happen is that business either reducing its production capacity or closing shop. If it reduces its production capacity, there is a likelihood in the extreme that the business will downsize. If it decides to pack up, there's a high tendency that most of the employees will also leave. Those scenarios businesses are trying to avoid. And I also align with what Dr. Bankole said, and we have sent our recommendations to government that you must focus on, one, ensuring the disposable income, the cash flow in the hands of Nigerians and workers is sustained. And at the same time, we must ensure that production continues at the enterprise level. Now, how do we do that? Quickly, one, each said the issue of taxation. Giving tax holiday is one of them. There are new taxes that came up in the last few months. We've asked government to take a critical look at those taxes. You cannot squeeze a business from both sides. We are suffering, short-term suffering because of the fuel subsidy issue, and then compounded by the challenges that businesses brought over before the issue of fuel subsidy. So let government look deeply within the context of how do we support organized businesses in the reduction of taxes. As the president has mentioned, as one of his key policy thrusts will be addressing the issue of multiplicity of taxes. Now, coming to the issue to the employee side, I said businesses are focused on addressing the issue of welfare. Many are already looking at the hybrid business model, as it were. Many are already looking at 1 day, reducing the working days or working hours, as it were. Many are also looking at providing transportation in order to reduce the pressure on the employee. And the main issue of the minimum wage. For us, minimum wage is fundamental. But we don't fix minimum wage arbitrarily. There's an ILO convention, Convention 131 of the International Labour Organization on minimum wage fixing. And that is what Nigeria has applied over the years. It involves the tripartite, labor represented by NLC, TUC, employers represented by NECA, government represented by Ministry of Labor, and every other structure around it. So that same structure is what we have urged that should be called back into existence. The National Minimum Wage Committee should be reconstituted to start that process of negotiating the minimum. It's a negotiation, because we have to look at so many other variables before we arrive at the instant minimum wage. Come to think of it, the organized private sector currently is paying far, far, far more than the 30,000 minimum wage. So we need to do that quickly so that we address those issues. And lastly, on the question you asked, there are what we call 4 wage goods that we have recommended to government. 4 areas that an individual, whether you're a worker, you're a business person, you are the informal sector, that we all spend significant amount of our income on. One is transportation, as he has mentioned. Government should deal with that. We are not totally aligned with the issue of government running the transportation business. All the ones that government are run over the years, what has happened? We crave and request a public-private partnership to drive the transportation system. That is what has worked, and that is what we think can work. The second aspect is food. Let's government wrap up food production in the states that we identify as food baskets. And let the means to transport those foods from those interland back to the mainland be instituted. Those things cannot take more than 3 months in the short term. The third one is the issue of mortgage. Everybody must pay rent. Government must take a second look, medium term, long term, on the issue of addressing rent to own projects so that Nigerians can get cheap houses and cheap abodes to stay. And the fourth one is education. Everybody must go to school. If we want to maintain our status, our industrial status, and we want to really grow as a nation. And thank God the bill on student loan came up last week, the president signed it. Notwithstanding that we don't have the full framework, but it's a good way to start. And let us also focus deeply on the issue of TVET, technical and vocational training, that is being driven currently by NECA and also the Industrial Training Fund. Those areas are the areas we think we can look at in the short term and also in the medium term. While long term, we all come back to deal fundamentally to policy issues that will keep us in this growth trajectory.
Thank you so much for those suggestions. And once again, these are relevant conversations that could help in that meeting that they're having for palliatives and could actually make impact in the life of Nigerians. Mr. Adewale Smart-Oyerinde, Director General with NECA, thank you so much for your time. And also, I'd like to invite our viewers to join Mr. Oyerinde later tonight, 9 p.m. That interview you had with Ladi Akeredoluwale will be aired today, 9 p.m. So you will hear more of him, more of his suggestions at 9 p.m. during News Night later today. But thank you so much for your time with us this morning.
Thank you.
All right, now let's head to the market now and see if the palliatives have found their way, swam their way into the market.
Really, good morning. We talk about palliatives swimming into the market. I laugh.
Well, I know part of the markets, the equities was excited last week.
Quite excited.
So that's our palliative.
That's the palliative to us. But a lot of things are happening. You see GT Bank, saying that they're going to, increase the salaries of their junior staff. Some people are wondering, is that going to affect our dividend? Because everybody
don't pay them from our dividends.
Don't pay them from our dividends, but it's a good initiative. Everybody needs to kind of like to mitigate the impact of the subsidy removal.
Yeah, but remember when GTCO does that, it's also more expenses for their operations. So they also need a kind of buffer.
I think it's a little percentage from their OPEX. I don't think
doesn't matter how small. How many members of staff do they have? Even if it's a naira, by the time you multiply that. So what I'm just trying to say is it's also important. I mean, channels television, for instance, where we work and earn our pay, they could also, if they increase, it will also increase their operating costs. Exactly. So every business also needs buffer, just as I guess I've talked about, could be in the area of tax holiday, something to make it also easier for them to transcend it to members of the staff.
Very correct.
I guess is very important.
Very right in that aspect. So we're seeing pressure, seeing palliatives, we're talking about mitigating the impact of subsidy removal, but that's not affecting our reserves because it remained pressured last week, declining by about $194 million week on week to $34.62 billion as of June the 15th. Now, activities in the FX market closed positive, however. We did see that 42.36% jump in the total volume in the FX sports, forwards, futures, and FX derivatives markets. The total value jumped about 42% to over $1.19 billion. That's a big one for the market there. We see FX sports That's the I&E window rising by 17.67%, close at $643.92 million. That's total value of transactions taking place in that place. And we see forwards jumping over 1.13%. And our analyst is going to tell us why that is. Now, futures over 50%, and total value for the derivatives is up 88.4%. Now, we're looking at the fixed income market. We did see that bearish sentiment returning to the fixed income. That's the bonds and treasury bills market. That means yields are beginning to trend up because lower demand, low liquidities in the system is making buyers not, the appetite is becoming low for this stuff. And then we're seeing that yield trending up, and we hope it's sustained. But Odinaka Linus Nwonkwo is a fixed income dealer. Access Bank is going to tell us more about that. Good morning, Odinaka. It's good to have you on the program.
Always good to have you.
Odinaka, we're just going to quickly talk about what's been, a lot has been said regarding the floating of the naira. But can you give us a sense of how trading has been so far in the market, for the FX market?
So it's a bit accelerating. At least the FX traders can now compete for FX on a fair level. What we've seen is some counterparties are now willing to sell to banks. We've seen transactions being executed around 700 to 740 levels and up to also 750. But as at Friday, the closing rate was around 663, which was a bit of appreciation. So it's an exciting time to be an FX trader, really.
Time to be an FX trader. So, but we see the impact in the NAFEX. Let's quickly look at the NAFEX, the Naira market. That dropped about 22% and to close at over 600 Naira. We quickly have that on the board there. We see that it closed at 606 Naira, 86 kobo, down 22.9% week on week from its open of 467 the previous week. How would you say this has affected probably the futures market, the forwards market, in your own opinion?
So what you're saying from 467 to 606 is just an effect of the floating that is being done. For the futures market, because there's a bit of uncertainty at where it's trading, so we haven't seen the central bank opened up that portal for people to trade. Remember that the futures market is a naira settled contract with the CBN just the provider. So it's like a buy side for our clients. So anybody who wants to hedge will just go to the portal and kind of buy those futures depending on the tenor you want. So currently that's not available now, and I'm guessing that's because of a bit of the uncertainty. So until we get I feel around where the spot rate settles, then that could be opened up. For the forwards market, I saw that you mentioned it jumped by about 1,000%. So that could be likened, because there's no really a cap on the spread for forward transactions, though you must do it at the CBN guideline in terms of where the forward market should trade. It shouldn't be way too higher than what CBN kind of approved. So, but because of that, no limit of that 1 naira spread, you see a lot of people trying to take advantage of that, especially banks, especially if banks know that rates will appreciate over time. I rather sell forwards now to be able to cover in the future.
So what would we see, the likely impact on the bonds market, very quickly, if you can tell us that?
For the bonds market, right, which is the fixed income space, it's a good time because we are now seeing international investors being keen on the spot to just know the spot market rate in the FX. And what you're saying is they are trying to know if it's comfortable for them to kind of bring in and do a bit of a carry trade or arbitrage. Remember that the US, the Feds are trying to ease the economy, especially considering the speculation of a recession there. So it could be an opportunity for them to do a bit of a carry trade and bring it into the fixed income space. Today, there's a bond auction, and it's about 360 billion being offered by the DMO. 90 billion on the 2029, and also there are 3 new bonds being offered, which is the new 10-year 2033, there's a new 15-year 2038, and there's a new 30-year 2053. So that auction will open around, it should open around, it has opened already, and it closes around 2 p.m. So I'm sure a lot of investors are kind of training their base to understand, to be able to take advantage of those yields. That's what's currently happening in the fixed income space.
Definitely. One want to take advantage of those high yields at the moment. Thank you so much, Odinaka Linus Mokoko, fixed income dealer, Access Bank, for sharing those insights.
Thank you.
So the equities market ended up 5.49% to close at 59,000. Over 59,000, well, 59,000 points. We're still there, rightly there, sitting pretty. And then the market cap is still at 32.126 trillion naira. See that jump there? That market is going to stay up. But I don't think, because the market breadth was quite negative, so we're probably going to see some correction coming in. Profit taking might persist, yes. But I just hope it doesn't get very bloody, as did say last week, that we don't want it very bloody.
Well, it's a market cycle, so if it gets bloody, it's going to clean up the blood later.
It definitely will.
All right, well, thank you. See you at 1:30 for Business Incorporated. Let's move over to our London studio now, where Juliana is standing by with a lot of party stories. I don't know. Juliana, good morning. This Partygate story by Boris Johnson Justice refused to go away since last week, all through the weekend. It's still topping stories today in the UK.
Good morning, Innie. You're absolutely right. It's still a major talking point here in the UK, and it's going to enlarge later today because lawmakers are going to be given an opportunity to vote on the findings from the Privileges Committee into Downing Street parties during lockdown, when the vast majority of us were staying at home, staying away from our loved ones. And what's been revealed is that Westminster was the capital city for partying, and Boris Johnson has been accused of leading those parties. So he's been accused of the Privileges community for deliberately misleading Parliament. And now we know that he has resigned as an MP, so he will no longer, we don't think, be standing for the Conservatives. But in order for this to go through, they have to pass the vote. And this is likely to cause deeper divisions in an already fractured Conservative Party. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, he has been doing the rounds on British media today, trying to divert the attention to the issues that are really affecting this country, like the cost of living crisis. But of course, the media want to know whether or not he is going to turn up and vote. He has refused to answer this question. And I think he has a pretty good excuse, because his Swedish counterpart is in town and he'll be hosting him at Downing Street. But if he doesn't vote on the findings, and of course, this is like putty in the hands for Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, because it will make Rishi Sunak look weak. But then, of course, on the other hand, if he does vote for these findings, which would include Boris Johnson having his parliamentary pass being taken away from him, then this is going to cause further divisions in an already fractured party. So yes, Partygate, although they seem to have ended in 2021, it's still very much dominating headlines here in the British media.
Yeah, well, it seems Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is in a fix, the devil or the deep blue sea. But we'll see. What else do we have for this week? What are the expectations?
It was a big week for the central bank. Of course, we know the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey has been under immense pressure over the past couple of months because of rising interest rates in this country. They're currently at 4.5%. We're expecting on Thursday, when the MPC meet, for it to be hiked up to about 4.75%. This, of course, is to combat inflation. We're expecting inflation data in on Wednesday, currently at 8.7%. It could have nudged down to 8.5%, but still way too high. This is causing misery for people already battling with the cost of living crisis. But the issue with pushing up interest rates is it costs more to borrow. And this is why the mortgage sector in the UK is going through such a turmoil at the moment. We did have some breaking news this morning that there is going to be a new fixed rate interest rate for those on mortgages this could potentially push up your mortgage by about £700 a month, completely unaffordable for most British homeowners in the UK. In fact, there have been calls this morning asking for some sort of furlough deal or some sort of credit facility for people who are already struggling. And so, yes, lots of economic data, but certainly I think the main story, of course, is going to be the outcome of tonight's vote in the Palace of Westminster.
All right, and we'll trust you there to stay on it and give us the feedback, Juliana. I'll talk to you at 1:30.
Talk to you then. Thanks, Ine.
All right, from the UK, we go to the crypto space and see what's going on there. If we look at the board, we'll see that it's neutral at this time. It was neutral on Friday, and now it's neutral again. But certainly there have been movements all through. If we look at the price movement from the weekend till this morning, we would see that Bitcoin has dropped 0.75%. It's now at 26,403.53. Ethereum also has dropped. So even though it's a neutral sentiment, it seems swaying more towards the red side. And BNB is also down more than 1%. Cardano is actually 2.5% down this morning. SLP, the same way. If we look at the other prices, yeah, the top gainers there, looking lean, kind of, single digits, all of them. TWT, Shiba Inu, one of my favorite coins, I must say, even though that's not an investment advice. MKR, Kava, and XRP. But the top conversation on Nigerians' mind, that's if you're into crypto this morning, is that tweet from the CEO of Binance that they do not recognize Binance Nigeria Limited. And we wonder what that means. Binance seems to be receiving a lot of knocks these days. We know there's Binance US, which is currently facing those charges from SEC in the United States. And then we know there's Binance International, which a lot of people use to trade. But now Binance CEOs tweeted to say that they do not recognize Binance Nigeria Limited. Let's have Olumide now. They are in it, so they should be able to tell us. Olumide, good morning. What's this about Binance Nigeria Limited?
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me. So first of all, drama started when the Securities and Exchange Commission highlighted the fact that Binance Nigeria Limited was an unregistered entity and Nigerian investors should desist. So, from crossfires, a lot of people thought it was the subsidiary of Binance. If you understand Binance in the space, Binance is the biggest crypto exchange in the world. Last time we checked, it has more than 56 million users, and that's even bigger than the population of many countries. So they play a very systemic role. So that definitely had a dent. But days later, the CEO of Binance and founder tweeted that they don't have any affiliation and it's not a registered entity. But the news had little effect on the Nigerian investors because, first of all, a lot of Nigerians use the Binance proper. There's no affiliate domain that shows that we have a local subsidiary, and the Binance platform, is on registered applications like the Play Store and the Apple Store. So it's pretty much had a little dent, on it. But it definitely brought in sanity in the space and showed that, well, the Securities and Exchange Commission of Nigeria is more particular about protecting investors. It also sends signals that Nigerian regulators also need to work on the space because a lot of Nigerians have been scammed through rug pulls, through dubious entities, trying to take advantage of Nigerians because most of these things are not reported, and the tough and aggressive approach towards crypto assets by our regulators make it very difficult for Nigerian citizens to make their case heard in courts and things like that. So I think it has the statement by CZ has really dampened such concerns, and you could see, like rightly said, Bitcoin is hovering above 26,000 support level, triggered by BlackRock's application for ETF, and the fact that Binance US and the Securities and Exchange Commission seem to have a common ground on certain issues.
All right, so I think the summary of this is Nigerians beware. There's nothing recognized by Binance called Binance Nigeria Limited. So you can either trade on Binance International, but not Binance Nigeria Limited. I believe that's the summary.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, Olumide, thank you so much for giving us that clarification and warning. Now, let's, just before we go, let's do the top losers and see who they are. KCS is down almost more than 8.5%. Pepe, this is one of Ladi's favorites every time he talks about Pepe, down 5.77%. APE and APT all down. It's a slow market now, not helped by some of this Binance legality and non-legality in Nigeria and the United States. But I mean, I guess crypto traders and investors have thick skin and they have to see themselves through this. But that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for being a part of this first episode of Business Morning on Channels Television. I hope it was worth your while, and we do hope some of those suggestions, especially the palliatives, will be considered by the meeting of the government and even by employers also to help buffer the impact of the subsidy removal. Will Ibong will be back 1:30 p.m. update from the world of business. I'll be back 10 p.m. with the stock market report. You want to join me then? And it's a few hours into the day. Make some money. I'll see you tomorrow.